This is just a carry on from all of the disturbances that we saw last year. And again, we see kind of no potential compromise in sight. What happened over the weekend?
No. I mean, that was the core central issue, of course, is the universal suffrage. And that really came bubbling up again today, or yesterday, I should say. And the intransigence, or at least the perceived intransigence from the government by the protesters who claim that the government is not meeting their demands. And then the protesters as well, not willing to back down. So a lot of people over the last few weeks thinking that the worst was over and it was dying down and that perhaps Hong Kong could get back to doing what it does best, and that's commerce. I kept on saying, no, the main issues have not been addressed or even, no table to be put forward and discussed. So we are back to square one. Okay, it wasn't nearly as violent as some of the clashes earlier, but still the angst came bubbling back, as we saw yesterday. What started out, and this is the usual modus operandi here, where the protesters were fairly peaceful. They were down here in Chater Garden. But then as the day wore on, the frustration started bubbling up again. The police ordered people to evacuate because they said that some outliers started to get violent, and some of those protesters went beyond the approved area and allegedly attacked a few police officers. You mentioned it, Heidi. 4 police officers, according to the police, were injured. There were a few arrests. There were some barricades set on fire by the protesters. There was tear gas used to disperse those protesters. So again, rally, rinse, repeat. We're back into that cycle right now.
Steve, what's the hope of getting any progress on universal suffrage when we know where Beijing stands on this issue?
Yeah, well, Beijing's stance has been pretty clear since 2014 when they put forward that proposal where a Beijing-picked panel, basically largely Beijing-picked panel, would choose the candidates, 2 or 3, and then the permanent residents of Hong Kong would be able to vote on that. But of course, the protest leaders, if you want to call them that, have rejected that proposal all the way dating back to since 2014. The former security chief, who's now on executive council, Regina Ip, told me that offer is still on the table, but the protesters do not want that. As Martin Lee, the founder of the Democracy Party in Hong Kong, said, what's the difference between a rotten orange, a rotten apple, and a rotten banana? Of course, you reject it. So that's why I keep on saying that we are at a stalemate here. And the government put out a big statement late yesterday recapping why they cannot go forward with constitutional reforms to allow universal suffrage for the chief executive. And the bottom line comes down to there has to be a peaceful atmosphere for dialogue and mutual trust. There is no mutual trust right now.
Yeah, complete breakdown of trust. In fact, Steve, at the end of the day, it's also the economy, right? I'm wondering, given that we've seen, retailers close up shops, hotels and restaurants very quiet over this festive season, are we going to start to see that come through in the jobless numbers later on today?
You would think, wouldn't you? Because I've gone back and looked at the history of the unemployment rate. And in the aftermath of the outbreak of the global financial crisis, we were looking at an unemployment rate here at about 5.5% on average for 2009. And if you go back to SARS in June of 2003, the unemployment rate was as high as 8.5%. I mean, I was here during SARS. It was, desolate here in many of the shopping malls, and people were everywhere in masks for different reasons than they are now. But now the unemployment rate in November was 3.2%. It's expected to go up to 3.3% in December. But I think that's just the tip of the iceberg. Many economists we've spoken to, including at Bloomberg Intelligence, expect the wave of joblessness to rise steadily in 2020 as the retail sector, logistics, trade, etc., start to feel the brunt of now 7 months of protests.